How's it going, listeners? My name is Reed Hammond. This is the Riverview Wellness Podcast, and today I'm joined by
Sierra Meacham.
So today I just wanted to sit down and I really wanted to kind of dive deep on something I've been thinking about a lot recently and kind of wanted to nuance it with you. And that is mainly when we're looking at exercise, we both agree there's a bunch of different ways to do movements, resistance training to fall into this umbrella of exercise, okay? And specifically, there's this philosophy of functional exercises done with the specific goal of promoting mobility and movement and functionality in a person, right?
The very broad term.
Exactly. So I wanted to kick this off by saying, when I say functional fitness, before I kind of nail down this question, what does that mean to you? What do you think of when you hear functional fitness? What does that mean definitionally?
I'd love to actually know when we Google it, what it says it is. Can you Google that? And I guess in my brain, I think it's somewhat of an ambiguous term because functional can be defined differently for different people based on what they need. But bottom line is to equip somebody to be able to move in their everyday life. Pretty much.
Okay.
As broad as that is.
Let's see. Functional training, functional fitness, classification of exercise, which involves training the body for activities performed on the daily.
Okay.
So that was pretty good. You basically got it on that. Not surprised. What do you do exactly? Yeah, but I really wanted to nail this down, right? I've heard a lot of people say recently, or they would devalue exercises and say, this exercise isn't as worth doing because it doesn't correlate to the actions you perform on a daily basis.
It's not functional.
It's not functional, right? If we're going to use that term. My question is there ever a place to do exercises that don't correlate one-to-one with our daily activity?
And I take it you have an answer for this as well. And you
I have an opinion. Hear what I said. I'm curious how you guys say.
I think so, but what is the goal of the individual? I mean, like a leg extension.
Sure.
That's not a very functional, I would argue, exercise. But if you need to isolate the quad and the knee for knee rehab or just because you want to build up your quad muscles, I think that is appropriate.
Sure.
And I would actually argue on the knee rehab side, if we can forego the leg extension because we can do a good squat, the squat is going to be more practical in building up the quad and translating to your everyday life. Like some people have to start out the rehabilitation process with isolation work, but if we can get you to do a full squat, I'd rather do a squat with you for your knees instead of a leg extension. Maybe we didn't trickle it in. But if you told me you only have like 1 day a week to exercise, it might take us longer to reach your goal. I would forego the leg extensions to have you start squatting if you were able to squat.
Okay, so in general, how would you say you feel about isolation work movements? Like, do you feel that because they are inherently isolating a muscle group, they are generally on a correlative scale less functional across the board?
Yes.
Okay, so you've kind of already given me an example here of the time and the place, right? We need to build up the knee and you're not capable of doing the squat, right? So maybe we start with the leg extension. And the individual who is healthy and mobile and doesn't have any crazy mobility issues, is there a time and place for those movements at all, like the isolation work? Or should it all be mostly free weight? I mean, maybe we could say mostly or less, but try and pick a side here, right? Is there a balance we can strike? Is there a balance you recommend to most people?
I think what it really comes down to for me is how much time do they have to dedicate to a fitness routine?
Sure.
Because I got some people that I'm working with right now, like they've got 1, maybe 2 days a week to lift weights. They've got 1, maybe 2 days a week to do some mobility, and they've got 1, maybe 2 days a week to do some cardio. So I give 1 full body resistance training session, an optional resistance training session. And for the most part, these are all compound movements that I would arguably say, for sake of this comment, are more functional,
Sure,
in air quotes. But if it was an individual like yourself who's training 6 days a week and you have a
I
goal.
might be the exception. Of
Maybe
the rule.
we'll give you as an example because you're an extreme, and then we'll kind of meet in the middle. Like you're training 6 days a week. You have a very specific goal for muscle growth, muscle hypertrophy. You would like to compete in bodybuilding. Like there is a huge place for muscle isolation in your routine. And so if we took the person in between who maybe has 3 days a week to do a routine, isolating a muscle group isn't necessarily a bad thing if it feels appropriate for that person. Like if they have a history of, we were on knee issues, then maybe we are doing lots of single leg squatting and bilateral squatting. But then 1 day a week, maybe we're incorporating some single leg extensions. Although there are certain movements that I would choose prior to the single leg extension. Like I last week had tweaked my knee and I was doing a lot of backward sled drags and backward sled walking.
Sure.
Which I would argue is more functional than a single leg extension. So there are usually things that I would pick before that. So it depends on how much time the person has, what equipment they have accessible, and what specifically their goals are.
Do you pick these movements because they translate to daily movement patterns? Like, is that why you prioritize? Maybe I don't say prioritize here, but like, is that why someone would prioritize these movements, for example? Because they feel like by engaging in more functional movements, the backwards sled drag as opposed to the leg extension, that their day-to-day life becomes easier in a way that a leg extension wouldn't provide them?
I'd say yes, but you may not notice it like immediately because the way that the body is supposed to move is, evenly distributing load across multiple muscles. Like as you walk, the ankle, the knee, the hip, they all take some level of force every step you take.
Okay.
And so when you teach movement patterns where multiple joints are moving together, you are training the body to distribute force more evenly. And so that's where, yes, sometimes there's an appropriate place for the leg extension. But even with the backward sled walk, like you are training distribution of load over multiple areas and not overcompensating, putting too much force on one spot. Because some people just...
So is it
some people
a technical adaptation in addition to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's what you're saying. So it seems like that's kind of where the larger value comes in my mind, right? Is where people say we should prioritize functional movements because the technical aspect of it translates better to the day-to-day. Because the isolation work, we would agree, trains the muscle regardless, right? So I've also heard this, and I want to hear what you think about this. People training specific for sports, okay? Oftentimes, and this is the best information I've managed to gather, it seems like the best strategy when engaging in sports is to train for strength and the outcome you want for your sport. So I want to be bigger, I want to be stronger for my sport, and then do your sport-specific movement separate, right? You don't train for basketball by throwing a bowling ball at the hoop because the bowling ball's heavier, right? Because then you pick up the basketball and now it's all wacky, right?
Yeah.
So what you do is you do your exercises over here, traditional exercises, whatever those look like for basketball. I don't really know what you would train for basketball necessarily, but you would do those in the gym, and then you'd go play basketball for an hour a day or do your drills or whatever, right? So we've kind of have this dichotomy where we're not doing basketball-specific training in the gym. I mean, we're training for basketball, but we're not doing basketball-specific training. And now we're going outside of the gym to train specifically for basketball, right? It seems to me with like something like functional fitness, I guess the daily life, it can be compared here to the example of the sport, right?
Yeah.
Where we're trying to incorporate the habits and whatnot of daily life into the gym. Why do you think that's different?
Repeat that last part.
So like if we're saying like, if you want to get better at basketball, you train in the gym and you also train basketball. But with the functional fitness, it's saying if you want to be more adapted to daily life, you train in the gym for daily life. Not train in the gym and then do technical adaptations for daily life.
Then you also have to teach, you have to take what you're doing in the gym and translate it over. Because the point that I was trying to make was like some people we'll keep going on the knee example,
Sure, let's stick to the knee.
have self-proclaimed bad knees. I hate that term because our bodies are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. And you may think your knees are bad, but there's probably a lot of things that we can do to heal them and get them feeling better.
Sure.
So self-proclaimed bad knees. And so every time that they sit down on the toilet, they push their hips back as far as they can and they try not to get any load on their knees. And so what might happen, if we're hypothesizing, is either the knees are going to get really weak and then they might start to experience their own issues. And it's kind of like that cycle that you're stuck in of like, my knees are too weak and I never use my knees and they're not going to get stronger until we start putting a stimulus on the knees. Or I don't know, you're putting a lot of overuse on the hips because you're not evenly distributing the load the way that you're supposed to. So the idea is that when we're doing these functional movements in the gym, because if you take somebody with this issue and you only do leg extensions with them, and you never teach them how to squat,
Sure.
then they're never going to start sitting on the toilet correctly because they have this trained way of doing it that even once the knees start feeling better, there is a adaptation of the nervous system that is required to be able to move differently. Because ultimately, like when we're looking at movement as a whole, we have flexibility, strength, motor control.
Sure.
So kind of the three big areas that we need to address. And really only with like the strength piece is isolated hypertrophy work going to be able to address. I guess sometimes with the flexibility, but if it's specifically
what do you
an
think
isolation
about
exercise.
Combinations of isolation movements to address a problem. For example, if it's, I have nothing against the squat. I would just like to go on record and say, like,
You're just
I'm
poking the
a
bear.
huge proponent of functional movement. I'm super curious to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah.
The guy can't sit on the toilet, and we're saying the squat's great because it's a hip hinge and your knee, you're addressing
flexion,
multiple.
yeah.
You're training your entire system, right? What if I say do leg extensions, and now we're also doing another hip hinge movement in a more isolated manner than a squat would be?
It's still not the same.
Oh, sure, but why not? Because I'm strengthening both areas at the same, like maybe even more effectively in isolation, right?
Maybe let's go back to the flexibility, strength, motor control. Flexibility being the range of motion that a joint has, strength being how much force I can produce, or even the size of the muscle. Those kind of both fall into that camp. And then motor control being the technical proficiency of the movement, just for everyone to be on the same page with how we're defining things. Where was I going with that? So maybe doing an isolation on the hips and an isolation on the knees addresses flexibility. If it's like, I don't know, say you're doing a kneeling sit down where it's pretty isolated to the knees and you're helping with the flexibility. And maybe the hips in some way too, if we can think of an exercise where you get a lot of stretch on the hips at the bottom. It may not even be an isolation exercise at that point.
Yeah, at some point you do have to start saying this is just a compound movement. And we're doing a lot of this stuff.
But, and then also, so maybe we could say that it's addressing flexibility. Yeah. And then, but we're not really looking at motor control at all because you're just moving a tiny little range of motion. So the only thing that we're really addressing there is strength. For sure.
Yeah, definitely strength.
And now we're not training, maybe flexibility. Maybe if it's not an issue, it doesn't really need to be addressed. But then the motor control piece is completely being neglected. So we always have to look at movement with all three pieces.
I think it's interesting though because like, how much motor control, technical ability do you need to sit on the toilet? Because the difference between like the daily life.
I could tell you what my benchmark is.
Go ahead.
The average person, like to be able to sit on a standard sized chair. And some people you might want to be able to go a little bit. There's actually a number that I can't remember. I want to say it's like 19 inches or something like that.
That feels about right. 18 inches was what I had in mind.
Yeah. So like if you are somebody who is maybe a little bit on the older side, you've had some movement issues throughout your life, like have a strong squat to about 18, 19 inches, and you should be covered for the bulk of basic movement in your life.
And you're saying that a lot of that comes not from necessarily strength or flexibility, although that is a part of it, but technical?
It really varies. I mean,
if we can completely address the strength and flexibility side of the squat movement, are we saying that because they haven't technically mastered the squat movement that they're going to be less efficient at sitting in chairs?
They may feel fine sitting in a chair, but it's the long-term implications
Okay.
that I'm worried about. Like,
Sure.
are their knees slightly valgusing and their ankles collapsing, and when they
Sure.
sit down on the
What
chair,
kind of damage are we looking at long term over time?
yeah, it's
based on-
that acute chronic.
That's
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, is all. And I'm very glad you decided to sit down and let me pick your brain a little bit today.
Yeah, I didn't really know what exactly we were going to.
I largely- I
very
agree.
broad idea.
It is, and I think it's super important that people understand. I mean, if nothing else, that the technical aspect of things is super important, and the amount of technical application you can get from. I mean, like, I don't like just saying functional movements because it's such a broad term, like we already said. But like
Yeah.
that you can get out of these functional movements is great. And I think neither of us is saying that there's no place for isolation work for strength or muscle growth, right? So I mean, just holistically, I think considering why we're doing the movements we're doing and the importance of it. And if you are someone who has problem getting up from the toilet, right? Maybe there's a time and a place for you to take some of the isolation work out of your routine and work on a more technical application of some movements in the gym. But yeah, I appreciate you sitting down and answering. Let me just
I think the biggest last thing I want to mention is
by all means.
I think the average person who maybe isn't super familiar with gym lingo or hasn't worked out a ton
Sure, I kinda
gets
get
a little
lost in that pool.
confused by the term functional fitness. I more recently had somebody who wanted to film some content of me working out to use it for videos for something, and they told me to do like functional movements. I was like, okay, like, what do you want? Like, because it's such a broad, like,
It is. It's a huge term.
There's a saying in the fitness world, like, the methods are many and the principles are few. And so,
Heard that before.
yeah, there are so many ways that you can work out and take good care of your body. So I don't know, like, don't overcomplicate it, I guess, is kind of the bottom line. There's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down.
There
but
is, and we
just
kind of
getting your
went.
body
This
moving.
kind of entire episode was a rabbit hole that I
yeah,
was saying about
yeah, but
recently,
it's kind of fun.
It was a good time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. Once again, I'm Reed Hammond. If you're looking to find us or more content or information, please, like, subscribe, follow us on all the platforms that we're available on. If you're looking for me specifically, you can find me on Instagram under Reed Hammond. If people are looking for you,
Instagram at sierrameacham.livefit.
all right. Thanks for tuning in. I guess you'll hear from us later. Bye-bye.